Okay, we're live now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, and we are the Senate Government Operations Committee. We have two good members joining us on Zoom, and we're going to get started with S-183. And just to remind everyone, it's been a little while since we looked at this bill. This is the bill about a plan for reorganizing or re-envisioning the Agency of Health Agency of Human Services. Okay.
Yes.
We might need to change the title.
I was thinking that as I looked at it.
Yeah.
All right, well, good afternoon. Jen Carvey from the Office of Legislative Counsel. And so, yes, this is S-183. It is currently entitled An Act Relating to Planning for the Agency of Healthcare Administration. But by the time we get to the end, we might want to rethink that. So it is a strike all amendment. And it starts with a section 1, re-envisioning the Agency of Human Services and report. So it directs the Secretary of Human Services in collaboration with the Deputy Secretary of Human Services and the Commissioner of each department within AHS and in consultation with the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, the Office of the Child, Youth and Family Advocate, Disability Rights Vermont, the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and other relevant stakeholders to develop recommendations either for restructuring the existing Agency of Human Services or for dividing the existing Agency of Human Services into two separate agencies. We would have the Secretary provide recommendations to this committee, that your and Senate Health and Welfare and House, the Government GovOps, Health and Human Services committees by February 1st of 2025. Including recommendations on how the recommended configuration would center the needs of and lead to better outcomes for the individuals and families served by the agency and its departments, how the recommended configuration could improve collaboration, integration, and alignment of the services that the agency and its departments currently provide, how the recommended configuration could address the workforce and personnel capacity challenges that the agency and its departments encounter, how the recommended configuration could address the technology and facility challenges that the agency and its departments encounter, a transition and implementation plan for the recommended configuration that's designed to minimize confusion and disruption for individuals and families served by the agency, its departments, as well as for its staff, a proposed organizational chart for the recommended configuration and estimated costs or savings associated with the recommended configuration, and it will take effect on passage. And you may want to think of a new title.
Yes. Okay. Are there any questions for Jen? Yeah, Senator Watson.
Thank you. Yeah, so just comparing it to the as introduced draft, and so it looks like the findings are gone, which is fine, and just checking to see if there are, just trying to compare it.
It's not super. I mean, it's both of them are looking at figuring out doing something different, but otherwise they're not all that similar anymore. So the bill as introduced would have a working group to figure out how to divide and would presuppose we're dividing into two agencies, one being Human Services, the other being Healthcare Administration. And it would direct exactly how that split would work. Also have them look at some other issues. And you can set up, and it's a whole working group, so it's got meeting information and reports and stuff. This one is directing the Secretary of Human Services to lead it, telling her who to consult with, among others, but saying, make a recommendation for
Helps.
Yeah, or do we split it up, or do we somehow do something else with the existing one? So either restructuring the existing agency or dividing it into two separate agencies.
So one of the reasons that the draft is changed like this is because what I saw in S-183 was it was asking and answering the question, basically saying, we think something needs to be done and here's what we want to do to change it, and report back to us on our thing. And I think in talking to various people, there are a lot of different ideas on how things could be restructured. Could be two different agencies as proposed in the original bill, or it could be 2 different agencies with different configuration. Could be 3 different agencies, it could be the same big agency, but organized internally differently. So I was thinking it would be more productive to ask the question, not answer it, and just say, these are the things that we want you to figure out in your recommendations. You know, if you're gonna reconfigure it, how would it impact the client, how would it impact the workers, how would it impact the technology, that kind of thing. So, and as Jen knows, I really don't like findings, so I just got rid of all the findings. So, that was sort of the logic of it. Go ahead.
I have maybe 2 suggestions. I don't know if now's the time. I'll have to wait. Yeah.
Why don't we hear the testimony
Yeah.
and then we'll talk about suggestions.
I will note, Madam Chair, you in describing it said it could be 2, it could be 3. Right now it says either restructure or 2. We could say
Oh.
2 or more if you want to leave it more
Sure.
open.
Yeah,
Is one of my
that-
suggestions?
Okay, perfect. Senator Washington. Or do you have another suggestion along those
I
lines?
do have an whole, well,
Okay.
I'll hold on to it.
Okay. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, Ann. Are you able to stay or do you have to run to
No,
another place?
I'm
Okay,
planning to be here.
perfect. Thank you. I think we're gonna start with Mike. That was the request. You lead it all.
Happy to.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Is Mike Fisher, healthcare advocate. I start with a apology. I cannot remember whether in January, when you took up this bill briefly, I actually came to the table and spoke, or whether I just talked to individuals.
Go ahead.
I thought you spoke at the table, maybe.
Do you remember? I don't think you did. I think you were just talking to us.
So I say that because at the risk of repeating myself, I don't want to say the same thing to the committee twice, but since none of us can remember.
Go for it.
I guess what I'll say is, I appreciate the new version. I came in here, or I originally, when sort of the discussion of me coming in and testifying about this bill, I came in here to oppose it. I have been around the agency for a long time, and I've been around state government for a long time, seen reorganization efforts and their expense and how busy they make everyone and the outcome. And my general comment about go forth and reorganize the Agency of Human Services was going to be, or maybe would be in this process, I'm not sure is worth the effort. I think it takes everyone a huge amount of time. And at the end of the day, you still have all of the departments that are currently in the agency. And if I asked you, what is the hardest job in state government? I will ask you, what's the hardest job in state government?
Secretary of the Agency of Human Services.
Do you really think it's the secretary?
I don't know, maybe the frontline workers,
I was gonna
actually.
say, I would say maybe child protection workers.
Yeah.
Corrections officers.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was gonna go a couple notches down. I mean, I actually think the commissioner of DCF is a really hard job. I think the commissioner of corrections is a really hard job. You make decisions that really have a huge impact on people's lives. And I think notches down closer to the real lives of people where you see the impacts of those decisions, that's where it's really hard. I think that the secretary level has a tremendous amount on their plate, but they fly above those day-to-day details is my point. And if you make the agency into 2 or 3 or 4, you're still gonna have, the real hard work is below the leadership level, in my opinion. And I'll just recognize I've been around for both in the legislative position and on the front line, the challenges for change effort. And I think that fits in the category of what I described earlier as something that with a tremendous amount of effort, and I don't think it resulted in a lot of change. And let me also just say, hey, I'm sitting here with the title of Chief Healthcare Advocate, and is indeed what I am. But over the years, I have worked as a then SRS worker. I have worked as a reach-up worker. I have worked as I've been on the front line of Child Protective Services issues as an employee of the Addison County Parent-Child Center for a lot of years. I worked directly out of the Secretary's office for a little while as a social work intern, doing juvenile justice work. So I've been around a lot of the different parts of, and then of course in this building. So I sort of recognize, I think I'm speaking more from my previous experience than from the healthcare advocates position, but there's no conflict. So I appreciate the new draft of the bill. I think it goes in the right direction, not answering the question before the secretary has a chance to study it. And I submitted a suggested language that is on your webpage, but I also have on paper.
On paper. Okay, share, or only one first. I think, do you have another one?
I do.
Thank you.
And does your community system have?
She has the online one.
She's
high tech. Yeah.
So, and the intent is really to go in the same direction. Don't presume the answer before you ask the question. And to put the sort of the concept of the needs of Vermonters more front and center. So the stakeholders shall evaluate the current structure of the agency and develop recommendations to address the current needs of Vermonters. Recommendations may call for a restructuring of the existing agency or dividing. And then at the end, or any other warranted recommendations. Open this up a little bit. What is the recommendation of the agency with input from various stakeholders to make sure the agency is functioning certainly structurally set up right to serve the needs of Vermonters? I think that's an interesting question to ask, and it should not be busy work. It should be a serious question. I will add that from my framework in healthcare, it is not those, I think it did not touch the other sections of the bill, the remainder of the bill. But there is something that says those that are served by the agency, and I would just recognize, particularly due to public health, all Vermonters are served by the agency. So those are me.
So are you recommending a change in that,
No, I think it's fine. I'm just answering it says Vermonters served by the agency, and I'm just answering, giving you my perspective that really does include
everybody?
all three.
Yeah. Are there questions for Mike?
And I think where the suggestion earlier of maybe it's not two, I think that could easily be made consistent with these kinds of changes. And I'm not married to it. I'm just really in the interest of picking in to make sure it does the job you want to do. Everyone to offer the suggestion.
Great. Thank you. Any, or Senator Watson?
I have something to build off of this because my other suggestion is sort of related to this actually.
Okay.
Because I was thinking along the similar lines, and so in the spirit of like evaluating the question, thinking about what would be in the report, so including the following, we've got all of these statements that are like how the recommended configuration would do whatever. I'm wondering if it makes sense to have because it's an evaluation of if we go with this language, an evaluation of the current structure or any recommendations. some kind of, for lack of a better phrase, like a pros and cons sort of analysis, like, like a breakdown of the advantages and disadvantages of moving to a different structure. So that, ultimately, if it's us that says, okay, now we want you to go forward with this change, that we know what the costs, just what the pros and cons are gonna be. So beyond like, how would you do it, like, something we could use to evaluate should we.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where would you put that language?
I would put it, I would actually, if it
Just
me, I guess, I would put it before the number one, in the. And shall provide recommendations. I guess maybe, no, it's not really a recommendation, because what I'm suggesting is more, structured for the analysis. And what would we wanna see in an analysis? And.
So you see number 7, it's saying something more than cost and benefit, but it,
Right, yeah, like, we're going to see more friction if these things are separated, or that might not be the right word, but because it's no longer one department, like, this kind of communication is going to be more difficult, or, which is it's not a financial cost, it's more of a social. So, and there may just be other intangible pros and cons,
Okay,
so maybe it's.
can I put the word rationale, maybe, is that like, I
Oh,
apologize.
yeah, so hold on till you're up
I
here.
apologize.
That's, yeah.
Okay, why don't you mull,
Mhm.
see where you think it might fit in? I hear you, it's sort of like saying you want there to be a structure to the evaluation that they're doing.
Yeah,
And
or-
it's a sort of cost benefit analysis
Yeah.
or a gap analysis. There are a lot of different kinds of analyses, but maybe cost benefit is
Yeah.
what would you lose and what would you gain kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
it reminds me of something that I had intended to say earlier. I think, if anything, the criticisms I hear around the agency is a need for better communication or coordination between divisions. Again, I don't know whether I said this outside the table or at the table last time. Back in the day when I was doing that work as a direct service person, you literally can have a family who has a family development plan for DCF, for Reach Up, that says, get a job. And case plan for DCF that says, don't get a job. You literally can have those conflicts playing out in individual families' lives. And so, and you could have a probation
Yeah.
plan that tells you to do something else. If anything, my overall comment as it applies, as it really impacts people on the street, is request for better coordination, not
Right.
separation.
And that might not have anything to do with the
The
structure, the fact that it's one agency or two agencies. Yeah. You want to speak?
To Mike's point, I think it's really important to highlight that those conflicts we're talking about in a really intellectual sense are with some of our most vulnerable Vermonters, and it has the ability to completely destroy their lives. And so I think it's really critical that as we look at this, we're looking at better outcomes and how we know they're better outcomes, but also accountability to those families and accountability to Vermonters. So I don't know how to include that in here. But I certainly, I have in the last year gotten a lot of complaints from constituents about things like that. And I can certainly point to other places where I think we are sort of missing accountability. One of them is sort of within the department or within child protection, that seems to be a cycle. Children who are in the child protection system grow up to be adults in the child protection system. And I think if that cycle is continuing, it's not working. We're not doing a good job. And so I want to make sure we are really.
Do you have a set suggestion of where we?
I'm mulling.
Okay. You mull, okay. Senator Norris,
Quick question for you, Chair Hardy.
yes,
As one of the sponsors of this bill, I'm one of the three sponsors of the bill.
yep.
What's the crux of this bill? Did someone come to you? Is it something the three of you decided you want to do?
I'll just be blunt. Senator Kitchell has been for many years interested in a restructure of the Agency of Human Services. And, you know, when she came in and presented the bill to us, she explained the history, and she has personal history both inside and outside the agency, and she thinks there's a better way to do it. And Senator Lyons also has a lot of history and experience with the agency, and she thinks there's a better way of doing it. And I think there could be a better way of doing it. So that is the crux of the bill. And you know, so the original bill had all those findings, sort of like leading up the history of the agency. The agency was originally started back in the late 1960s when things were really different, and there were far fewer services and far fewer programs, and it was really kind of a small, kind of not that significant agency compared to what it is today. Now it's like more than half, or about half, of state government. So I think that's the desire, is to say, and I think she has a very specific vision for how it would be divided up. I think Senator Lyons might have a slightly different one. And for me, I think there could be a better way of doing it, but I don't want to answer the question in the bill. I'd really like to hear, you know, input from the agency, and then with the active collaboration and consultation with advocates whose job it is to literally hold the agency accountable and their services. So and that's why the actual advocates, and I don't know if there's another advocate that you all would suggest, but you know, that's part of what Mike does every single day, and Matthew's a little newer, but that's what you do every single day. Which, by the way, we also invited the Disability Rights Vermont. They are not able to make it. Lindsay is out of town. She might send somebody tomorrow maybe, but they are supportive of the bill. So they said, you know, they're excited to be involved. And then we did invite from Karen Alpha's person, and she's coming tomorrow. So does that answer your question, Senator Norris? Okay. Yeah, Senator Watson.
Thank you. Ask a hot potato question. One of the things that I would like to see in the end, not necessarily this bill, but just in the future, in general, is universal single payer healthcare. Do you think that it is more likely that we would be able to achieve that if the agency, if there was a separate agency of healthcare administration?
Haven't thought about this
Okay.
for a long time, but my gut feeling is that such a move has to be driven from the chief executive. And so.
Do you mean the governor?
Yes. And so whether the equivalent to 2 pieces or 3 pieces or 7 pieces, I don't think it has anything.
Okay. Thank you.
And I suppose it's important for me to say, it's true, I work with state government, with my counterparts in state government every day, and I should use the opportunity to say we have a great working relationship. We have no complaints. They have very tough jobs to do. And there are times when they make mistakes, but they engage us. And finally, I'm happy to engage in this effort.
Thank you.
All right, I think we'll have Matthew come up, and Mike, if you're able to stick around, great. And Matthew, you've not been in here, so we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I represent the Addison District.
Olivia, Senator Tanya Vyhovsky, nice to see you again. I represent Chittenden Central District.
Becca, I don't know if you're there, but that's Senator, this chair, empty chair is Senator Rebecca White. She represents the Windsor District. And then.
Hi, Senator Bob Norris, Franklin County and Alberg.
Ann Watson, Washington District.
Oh, Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
And
Who's,
just-
for this testimony, sick. So, hey, perfect for the Agency of Human Services. And so, did Mike, and I just may have missed this, but I was hoping to ask Mike a question before he departed
Oh,
the
I'm
chair.
sorry, Senator. I'm sorry, I missed you.
I'm still here.
That's o- it's
She's still in the
Is it,
meeting.
is it possible to still do?
Yes, go ahead.
So, Mike, you've seen this agency from so many different perspectives, and I trust your judgment enormously. Is it the problem that it's too big, or is it the problem that it is not well managed?
It is indeed big. It is indeed huge. I should have recognized that in my introduction. And it has indeed grown over the years. Jake Kitchell was right. It is bigger and more complex. And I don't have any, I'll say again, the parts of the agency that we interact with, Medicaid in particular, I have no complaint about its management. Nor do I know, your question is interesting, Senator. I don't believe, and I might be wrong, but I don't believe that the motivation for this bill was motivated out of the question of its management, of how well it is managed.
No, I agree with you. I don't think Ginny and Jane have been putting this bill forward for, I don't know, 8 years, a long time.
And then the final statement about it is that we should always remember in things like this, and I'm sure you guys say this every day in this room, we're not talking about today, we're talking about the structure going forward. We're not talking about the person who's in place today, we're talking about something that will be strong through the next numerous secretaries and whatnot.
Well, I mean, I asked the question because you and I have seen so many different secretaries, so many different commissioners. I mean, and there are big organizations that are well managed, and they don't seem to be breaking up. I mean, some of them are, but some of them aren't. And so it's a question you have to ask because IBM is IBM is huge but well managed. Indeed is huge but well managed. How many employees are at AHS? About 1,000?
I can't remember, but Shayla is gonna bring us everything, that kind of data tomorrow, and she testified.
It's smaller than many well-run corporations. So it's just, I guess it's the question you have to ask is it the size or is it how it's managed? So, and maybe part of how it's managed will be better if it's smaller. That's, I guess, what we're weighing.
All right, thank you, Senator. Senator Yoski.
I do think, and I appreciate this, I too thought the other bill was a little too prescriptive, but I do think size is about more than just employees. It's also about breadth of what someone is covering. So while Indeed may have more employees, they're doing one thing, not all the things.
That's true, it's about jurisdiction,
Right.
as in addition to size, yeah. All right, well, sorry, Matthew, if you want to introduce yourself for the record and then tell us what your perspective is.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Matthew Bernstein. I'm the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate for the state of Vermont. I'm a lawyer, former high school teacher, it may, if you'll indulge me for a second, I think it might help for just me to summarize a little bit more about what our office does. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think it's relevant to this conversation. So we are an independent, nonpartisan state office. I was appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. The term of the advocate's 4 years. And we are outside of DCF, not within the chain of command of DCF by design, but within state government. And we are statutorily required indeed to advocate for the welfare of children, youth, and families receiving services directly from DCF. So we're focused on DCF as opposed to AHS or any other framing, or through funds provided by DCF. So while technically that's centered into 6 departments of DCF, we are, in particular, the statute mentions repeatedly children in the child system and in the juvenile justice system. So Senator Norris and Senator Wachowski know well our juvenile justice work. And so, our comments on this bill emerge from that mandate. And if I could just read a couple of more of our specifically outlined duties, and these are shalls in state statute, because they pertain to this work. So work in collaboration with relevant parties to strengthen services for children, youth, and families. Analyze and monitor the development and implementation of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and policies related to child, youth, and family welfare and recommend changes where appropriate. We review individual complaints and respond where we deem it necessary. We support children, youth, and families by providing information about rights and responsibilities. And then we provide systemic information concerning children, youth, and families to the governor, state agencies, legislators, and others as necessary. So similar to the healthcare advocate, our mission is big. Actually, the last one on that list is an annual report. We just came out with our first one in December, which is on our website. So our office is about a year old. And I would say, to get to some of the issues at hand, we would support this bill. I think the healthcare advocates suggested language, I think we would especially support, because it gives some flexibility in terms of how to respond to some of these systemic issues that we've been discussing today. So in particular, in terms of our constituency, what we see, well, I'll say first, I think to echo the healthcare advocates' concerns, so much of what we see in child welfare, special education, and other parts of policy related to children and families, procedure can substitute for real substantive change or for courageous policymaking, or however you want to frame it, for policy and practice that really supports children, youth, and families. And, we represent, I think, the most vulnerable children, youth, and families in the state. And so, my concern with a reorganization per se would be that it's a ton, to echo what the healthcare advocate said earlier, that it's a lot of work and a lot of effort with maybe a focus that doesn't get to the heart of what's wrong, And so I would just say that, I guess in particular, I think an example of how a reorganization or how this bill might make sense in terms of responding to the needs of our constituents. We've been doing a lot of work to help improve DCF's data system. This is the data system that the frontline workers use that, is from 1983 and is a mess, and also is the gateway to a whole host of federal funds that could flow to DCF. And that is, as we've done this work, and I will say, to echo Advocate Fisher, DCF has been very supportive in terms of collaborative with us and given us a lot of useful information, and we've really worked together on this because I think it benefits the department. It's become clear that AHS at higher levels has a big role there, and possibly up to the chief executive, as Advocate Fisher said. So I think that's just an example of how important it is how these entities work together. And in terms of the bigness, DCF itself is really big, and the Family Services Division is really big. The Child Development Division, right? All they deal with is child care subsidies, right? Which you may have noticed took up some legislative time. Not to mention, diagnosing disability for young children, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the Child Support Division, we have OEO. I haven't gone to the Economic Services Division, right, which deals with the hotels and general assistance and, reach up and beyond. So definitely this is a big entity. I think it does get into the jurisdictional questions of, if the state's going to be responsible and take the lead on these sorts of matters, that is a directly relevant, but also a separate question from how things are organized within that. In other words, some of this, I think, has to do with the increasing role of government in the lives of Vermonters, and that goes both directions always. So we don't have a particular stance on that. So anyway, I think that this. I guess one other thing about our office in particular, which is that we're new. We have 2 full-time employees only, right? We're essentially administratively akin to, honestly, to like a DCF, or at least a division of DCF, in the sense that we have to file all the same annual reports, right? We have 2 employees, so those don't take as long, but there's a certain burden on us just as an office. So this sort of an effort, we have to put in the hopper with all of our other efforts. And, you know, an hour spent on this initiative is an hour not spent on a lot of other things. And for a small office, that makes a big difference. And, you know, I'm not here to complain, but just to point out that there's no appropriation attached to this, right? So all of which is to say, like, this needs to be meaningful. And I think, you know, the language from the healthcare advocate allows for a breadth that could make it meaningful, even if we don't come to the table with a divide into 2, or you know, keep it as it is, or, you know, there should be a renaming of this division. I think the opportunity to present other changes that could be, you know, some of them frankly are cultural, I think, and some of them might be just operational and simple. I think that would make this more worthwhile, as opposed to just, you know, do we break it up or do we not, you know, remain or leave, right?
Yeah.
Some language. So there was one other thing I wanted to say, which I will stall and try to remember, which is, I will get it back, but I think yeah, I think that we would be, I guess this wasn't it, but one other thing that's relevant is, you know, so many of our constituents are dealing with, Senator Bajowski, the you know, the cycle you described of a child being in child welfare and then being a parent, and having their kids in the child welfare system. You know, we see that all the time. The intersection of disability, of healthcare, of child welfare, and sometimes juvenile justice, right? That takes a lot of service coordination, and having that all together in the same agency can make sense, right? You know, I was also, if you look at economic services, you know, having economic services in the same department and division as child welfare also can make sense, because sometimes families who there's a child welfare report, you know, what they really need is economic support. And so having those together can also make sense. But again, it has to be, you know, real lasting change, as opposed to, you know, procedure or rebranding, or, because I mean, I can tell you, you know, I'm new to state government as of last year. And, you know, I mean, I obviously, you know, had heard this before, but I mean, it's, you know, even just to change the letterhead, like, right, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of money, and it takes a lot of people a lot of hours, and, you know, it's necessary, sure, but I think we need to keep first principles in mind of why we're really doing this. And so, I remember what the thing was.
Okay.
What I wanted to clarify was the language in the bill right now talks about the secretary bringing recommendations as part of a process informed by the advocates and community members and others. And I guess, to put this gently, having been and currently being part of some stakeholder processes that are held by a government entity with a particular, like everybody has, view on an issue, it can feel sometimes like we're invited to the party so that they can say we're invited to the party, and we don't have a real meaningful voice. So I don't know how to reconcile that, but I just would point out that the way this is framed is the secretary shall bring the recommendations, right, with input. And so you know, that's something real, that has to mean something. And, you know, there's some sort of soft power, you know, if I assume I could, you know, send a letter to this committee if I felt like I wasn't, you know, we weren't being listened to, et cetera. But I just want to point that out, that that's the way the bill is written. And, you know, if that's the way it has to be written, because that's the way it has to be written, I want to assume best intentions, but I do think that sometimes these processes are, you know, people have interests, you know, and I think the advocates, what I like about this office is I feel like I'm in the place I want to be, which is to say, you know, I have a statutory duty to hold children, youth, and families that meet the characteristics I outlined earlier at the center. And someone can come to me and say, you're putting your own interests or your office interests above that, and maybe that might be true. But really what we're advocating for is our constituency, right? And whereas departments sometimes, you know, I don't, it just depends, right? And I don't want to assume ill intention at all. And, you know, we've also been part of lots of stakeholder processes that have been and are productive. So
Mhm.
I just point that out.
Okay, thank you. Two things, so I'm wondering if, to that point, if there's some way we could say, so what I was trying to avoid was to create a like working group where there's this person appointed and this person appointed and
Yes.
this person, then there's this number of meetings and the whole formal. I think it doesn't need to be that formal. But I hear you on, you know, ultimately the secretary is can consult with you and then do whatever she wants. And so maybe there's a loop back where it says something about, as it's right now, there's 4 of you listed, right? Yes. That the 4 of you sign off on it in some way. I don't know how.
I don't want to overcomplicate the
Exactly,
procedure.
I'm trying to figure out an easy way, or have a, like, your own report or something, I don't know, but
Maybe what I-
that would be more work for you. So, I don't know if you can think of something that might satisfy that concern, or Mike, if you can. But, and then also, that's one thing, if you wanna mull it, since we're doing a lot of mulling. And the other one is when you and I talked earlier this week, you had mentioned, a report that you thought might be helpful about out of University of Chicago.
Yes.
And then you and I talked about maybe saying something in here about reviewing relevant literature or something like that. I don't know if that's necessary or not either, but just wanted to bring that up because we had discussed it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that relates to what I was saying about economic supports for families. I think that the way it's written, there's a lot of flexibility, which I appreciate, you know, I think with including the healthcare advocates language. And I think there's room for that. I agree with, you know, not to argue with myself, but you know, we don't want to put too much procedure and it puts even more work on us.
Exactly.
I think maybe even just, you know, a verbal, just us in this room and everybody on YouTube, but you know, like, with a commitment that if we felt like the process, if we had additional input, we could bring it to the committee. You know, I think
Yeah.
that's
I mean, I do think
sufficient.
like the 4 people listed right now are advocates, so you could clearly know how to advocate. That's literally your job. So I would assume that if you didn't feel heard
Yeah.
and you didn't feel like the outcome that the secretary was recommending was what you wanted,
Yeah.
that the 4 of you would get together and be like, we're gonna write a minority report or whatever you wanna call it or something like
Yeah.
that. But we can put it in the formal if you think.
No, I think that's sufficient. I think, you know,
Yeah.
this is a public forum and we've raised that and you know, and honestly, I don't think, I don't, again, I want to be, we are collaborative and we are required to be, and I think the process can be,
Mike, do you wanna weigh in on that?
Just, there's a practice that the Green Mountain Care Board currently does, where they summarize in this public comments as a part of their meetings. So they say, the healthcare advocate came to the table and said,
Oh.
and then I had to say, I didn't quite get this right. But the report could include, as a part of the report back, a summary of the perspectives.
Okay.
And I don't personally think it's needed, but it is a way to get at something like that. So that if the report said, hey, everybody came to the table and told us to do X and we decided to do Y.
Okay, that's a,
yeah.
Matthew, what do you think of that idea?
What I think is, if we're gonna add something to, I'm wary of exactly what you said, Chair.
Yeah.
Right? If we're gonna add something to the language, and this is a slight segue, so, you know, apologies if we need to come back to the other one, but we're always, as Senator Wachowski know well, advocating for the voices of the directly impacted people to be part of the process, whether it's in this room before any committee or in a, you know, report process, I guess re-envisioning process such as this. And so if we're gonna put any more language in, I would maybe argue for that instead, like to include the voices of those most directly impacted, something like that. And that leaves space for how they're included, right? And sometimes people don't want to be included, and we certainly don't, right? Like, there's a lot of there's a lot of safety assurance that needs to happen, I would say, before people with lived experience come to the table. But I would also say that these processes often are set up in a way where it's hard for those folks to access. I was talking to a 19-year-old on our Child, Youth and Family Advisory Council today who, if time had permitted, would have been sitting right there, but had to go do some, had some errands to run. So anyway, we certainly represent those folks, but I think hearing them directly in
Yeah.
some way when the time is right would be helpful.
Okay. Okay, trying to figure out how
I
to.
apologize for adding another thing on top of the other one.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we're gonna, I'm gonna just circle back right now to Senator Watson. Mull, do you have some more?
I do.
Keep mulling.
So. I guess what I would recommend, I'm not sure where this goes, but the kind of language that I have in my head, would be something like, just evaluate the impacts on, the various departments within AHS, like, what is this gonna do to? DC,
correction.
exactly.
Okay,
As well, in terms of evaluate, I'm thinking about like, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Of whatever the recommendation is, and maybe that is separate from the recommendations. Maybe it's a part of B. I think either way is fine. I'm also happy to be wrong about this. Yeah, like,
well,
not.
so one of the things I would, in the sort of 1 through 7, I think what I was trying to get at was how any of the recommended configuration would impact all of the departments
Okay.
through the individuals they serve, through the employees, through the technology and facilities, but maybe it's too general, and you're looking for something more specific.
What might work is in addition to saying how the recommended configuration could improve, or how the recommended configuration could address, something about, evaluate and recommend.
Okay. You're trying to get an evaluation.
I'm trying to get
Okay.
yeah.
So maybe we start off by saying, I'm looking at you, sort of a paragraph about that this process shall include a a cost benefit analysis and impact evaluation or something. I don't know if those are the right words on I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at, but maybe it's not clear enough. Something about how the process is supposed, how the evaluation is supposed to happen.
Before you get to the recommendations,
Yeah.
sort of the middle piece of what this analysis looks like, that then comes, the output is the recommendations.
Yeah,
The word I was shouting from the sidelines rudely before I had
No,
this
that's
was
okay.
rationale, like the rationale for the suggested change, which I think is not exactly the same as plus is, but it sort of implies that like there's been a weighing of the way things currently are and how things could be better. And so there's a
Yeah.
particular reason that this change was suggested.
yeah, maybe it is the cost benefit analysis and reason, basically a rationale for why you're making these recommendations. Okay. That sounds good.
I guess I would just again put in a plug for, it's easier for the work of the committee to be more narrow than the statute says, but if something's in the statute, you gotta do it. So like, I would just be worried, and if you say this isn't the case, then I'll take your word for it, but like cost benefit of, if you're looking at AHS, right? If you're doing cost benefit of, if you're only doing cost benefit of 5 changes, that's one thing. If you're doing cost benefit or an analysis of like AHS, then you're just looking at a labyrinthine analysis, and again, that would be probably procedure over, like, the idea of making it targeted based on particular findings or, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can make this overly complicated by requiring some kind of, metrics and all of these things, and I think that might get to be more, and they will ask for a lot of money to do all that stuff, and I think this is not supposed to be that kind of study, so I think we want it to be meaningful, but not so in the weeds that it becomes overly complicated, is my, okay. You were mulling something.
I have been mulling, so in looking at the language that we got from the healthcare advocates, that expands a little bit, so what I did is where it says shall evaluate the current structure, I added outcomes and accountability of the agency and develop recommendations to address the current needs of Vermonters. Recommendations may call for restructuring, dividing, or any other warranted recommendations.
Okay, so current structure,
I added in outcomes and accountability.
outcomes, and accountability of the agency.
Yes. And then if we were to take this language, I think we might need to change, if now going back to the bill, on page 2, all of the things that say how the recommended configuration would need to change to how the recommendations, because we're now not only focused on configuration, we're focused on other recommendations. So in each of those, it would just get rid of configuration and change recommended to recommendations. And then adding in, I guess it would be, it doesn't have, I don't care what order it goes in, another bullet point that says how the recommendations would better hold the agency accountable to the Vermonters it serves and their outcomes.
Is that?
It's
Repetition of one
It's
though?
similar to one, and I tried how to fit the accountability piece into one, and my brain couldn't do it. Maybe Jen can do it better, which is why I created a separate one.
Okay.
I'm not committed to a separate one. I just couldn't
Okay.
figure out how to wordsmith one.
I wonder
Could you read that again? Sorry.
If we can wordsmith one to make it so it's the same, in the same flow, go ahead.
Yeah, so the bullet point that I was adding or combining with one is how the recommendations would better hold the agency accountable to the Vermonters it serves and their outcomes.
Okay.
Actually, I do now see how to do it in one, and it would be how the recommendations would center the needs of the individuals and families. No, I can't, my brain can't do
Is
it.
it- Is the part that you're trying to get in there, the
You
accountability part, is that the?
I
Yes,
think I'll play with it.
Okay, Jen will play with it.
Yeah, I
Jen
think-
is exceptionally good at this stuff.
yeah, I tried with one, and I was like, I can't make it make sense.
Go
I-
ahead.
So yes,
Yeah, I think I may just need to check in with you to see, I think some of it has, I just need to understand some of where it's
Exactly where
going. I
we're
think
trying to
it's
go, okay.
expanded a lot, and I'm not sure if that was.
Yeah, so I would like to try to keep it as focused as possible so that we're not giving them this like impossible task. So I'll work with Jen to try to get this accountability language in. I think Mike's language is good. And I'm not sure we need to say accountability multiple times, but we'll work on it and see if we can come to a happy ground on it.
so the only reason I have it there twice is sort of evaluate where they're at now and provide us recommendations for how to make it better. That's why it's in there twice.
Okay,
So if we can get it that was only in there once, that's fine.
okay. And then the summary of the perspectives of the advocates, is that something we wanna include, or is that necessary, or? I'm assuming that you guys will do written stuff anyway, and that you'll provide it in
Yeah.
some way. And you might even ask that it be included in their report.
I would prefer to have it not in the text of the bill. I think just raising it verbally in this space was more,
Yeah.
makes more sense, and I appreciate
Yeah, I think that,
Your response.
I mean, I will hear from them again tomorrow, but I think that they are trying to do this with best intentions and will include your perspectives, but if there's a problem, you know where we are. Okay, Jen, you and I can talk about it. We're gonna take this bill up again tomorrow because we're running out of time. And we'll have the other folks in. Thank you, Matthew and
Thank you.
Nate.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And we can go, oh, hey, Becca. Did you, Allison and Becca, did you have any, I'm sorry, I'm not doing. a
No,
good-
no. I
Do you
didn't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you for presenting.
Excellent.
And we'll be marking this up more fully tomorrow, but I assume we're not taking a vote on it tomorrow.
It depends on where we're at. We'll either vote on it tomorrow or Friday.
Okay.
We have to.
Well, if it's gonna happen. Thank you. Thank you. It's interesting. We've been noodling on this for a long time, so I think this is a better approach, Ruth. Thank you for redoing it.